All right, so in this one, we're going to be creating some corner units. And if you're new to this channel, this is part of a series of creating modular assets I'm doing. This particular one is be heavily reliant on machine tools and using the 3D cursor. Also, if you haven't watched the grid video, go watch that one first and come back to this one, all right? And so I'm going to go ahead and just start by creating a plane real quick, going into edit mode. And we're going to be snapping to the grid, so we'll turn that on. We're going to create a standard wall unit, just 3 meters tall. Nothing special here, right? All pretty familiar with this by now. Okay, and so we're focusing on corners in this one, but we're going to get pretty complicated here with all this. And so a standard kind of basic, simple as simple can get corner unit might do 90 degrees, something like this, right? And then you have a corner for inside. And of course, you'd probably want to offset these some amount. In this case, I'm going to be doing 10 centimeters. Okay, something like that. And so this is fun, actually. This works. You can actually leave these intersecting each other like that, and that's not a big deal. Because when you create the other corner on the other side, what's going to end up happening is it's going to get placed like so, and it's going to get placed with its offset. Alt-Z to turn on X-ray so it can move both. And we're going to end up with this kind of situation, right? So when we rotate this one 90 degrees, and we have it like so, we could pretty much take these two, flip the normals real quick, and just kind of line them up with each other. And it'll skew a UV map if you have it UV mapped already. Join it together. Select those two edges, and then Alt-A, align right with machine tools, line left, bam, done. And so we can do something like that, right? Not a big deal. We could still even bevel this a little bit if we needed to. And you can see, bam. Not too bad, right? So this still works. You don't necessarily have to bevel the inside corner. Now, where this gets to become a little bit more problematic is, let's say we wanted a wall unit that starts to spin around in this direction and creates a 90-degree kind of arc. The easiest way to go about doing this is really creating a cylinder. In this case, we're going to do a radius of 10 meters, and we're going to do a nothing fill right now. We're going to change it to 3 meters, and on the location, I'm going to set it to 1.5. That just brings it up appropriate amount there to line it up with the other walls. And I'm going to push everything back a little bit so we have this going on. Okay, and we can see here, this is going to work out okay. Generally speaking, a lot of times you'll have your pivot points on the grid in the side here, but we're not going to focus on that just yet. Instead, we're going to grab all of these, and I'm going to use the active element and just kind of push them out of the way real quick over here, just for a moment. All right, now this here, 32 vertices. The vertex count's important because you need to have about the same size face here. Now it's not going to be perfectly the same size. You know, these are 2 meters. This is going to be like 1.9 something, and so you need to figure out how many vertices you need, because if you wanted this to be more curved, you're going to have to you know, create more vertices so that you get more curvature in it. And this becomes a little bit of a problem if you make it more curved as well, because then you're going to actually have to model plugs that curve along with the wall and whatnot. So we're going to keep it simple in this one, and it helps you understand the basics of working with something like this, which is right now the origin point's actually in the correct spot, and we're going to actually place the 3D cursor over there. So Shift S, cursor to selected, you'll see it goes over there. So now we can set the origin point or the pivot point to the 3D cursor. All right. And once we do that, we could take this wall, and if we did a normal extrusion, it just goes back and forth on the normal like this. Doesn't help us much. But if we press E, do the extrusion, right click, it cancels the movement, but it creates the face. So now we can use the 3D cursor as the origin or the pivot point, and press S, Shift Z, we can move it in or out like so, and you can see it tapers. Okay, and that's what you need to create these kinds of wall units like this in these little corner areas. And so if I press S, Shift Z, and I move it in, make sure you hit Shift Z, because otherwise you'll scale on the Z axis as well usually. I hit Control and Shift while doing this, I move every 10 centimeters. Okay, so I can do E, right click, S, Shift Z, Control Shift, and snap like so. All right, and that's here in the orthographic view. And what this basically has done now is we can go back to global for a second, absolute grid. We now have wall units that line up with each other. Okay, while you're creating these things, also I just want to mention that it's really useful. You see that didn't quite line up, did it? Let's try this again. It's really useful to leave the borders, okay? And then put a loop cut down the middle as well. You might actually need that loop cut for various reasons. So in this situation, what we're going to be doing is cutting out windows and then putting a plug into those windows. And so we're going to go ahead and create a loop cut on both of them, bevel it one time, and we're going to leave it relatively flat. We're going to do width, type width. We're going to make these 1.2 meters. Okay, we're going to do a couple loop cuts real quick. And these are snapping to the grid. I'm holding Control and Shift, so it's 10 centimeter grid instead of the meter one. Because my grid right now is set to meter, by the way. So just need the idea of a window here. That's all we need for now. We can bridge edge loops here. Not a big deal. Bridge edge loops here. We'll even leave the inside for now. I'm gonna create another face real quick right here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Alt-N, flip that normal, and I'm gonna press P and separate that selection. Go to the side orthographic view. So this is a new object. Origin point's down here at the bottom, at the center. Just pay attention to that. So what ends up happening here is I can actually just press E, Y, and hold Control and Shift, and I'm snapping to the centimeter grid right now. Because we're in orthographic, it's using 10 centimeter grid. So the smaller grid would be centimeter grid. And I'm moving these out 5 centimeters basically, like so. And I'm looking at the top left there, so I can see the values I'm using, so I know they're lining up properly. And I can pull this one out 5 centimeters now. This just takes a moment, not a big deal. Okay, another 5 centimeters, there we go. And so this section, more or less, like it's pretty much done here. Just gonna extrude it all out a little bit. Extrude this back into the center and delete that face. Whoop, don't delete the face. Press Y, rip it. You can add, whoop, maybe we can, maybe we can't. Let's try it again. Is there extra face here? There's an extra face there. That's bizarre. All right, so this edge is actually, let me select everything and merge it by distance. I don't know what's going on with that edge there. I'm gonna press Y, rip that face, do a loop cut in it, like so. I could select this with L, Control B, bevel it. I'm just gonna create a little kind of idea of a window here. And I'm still not sure exactly what this edge is doing there. So it's just a free floating edge, I guess. So I deleted it. And so I might want something like this with this backside filled in. So if we had an interior space where potentially players or characters get into, we'd fill this in. If not, we could just leave it hollow for the most part. And we have this going on. Now this here is a flat face, right? This is just a regular wall unit. This is the curved one. Just want to point that out. We're working on a regular wall unit. And I'm just going to mirror this over, apply rotation scale, invert everything. Okay. This whole area, I can press L, delete that vertex, by vertex or face or whatever. Delete that little area. And the reason why you split up the plug is because now we can actually add other things to this. So if we wanted, we could duplicate it. Just pull it out here for now and go into edit mode. I'm going to place the 3D cursor right here real quick. We're going to create just a cube, scale it down. make it thinner. So if we wanted to put like boards in here, like maybe this is an old rundown building or something, and it's all boarded up, we can do things like that. We can also put things like curtains in here or whatever, all kinds of stuff we can do, right? And so I'm just going to board this one up though. I'm doing all this in edit mode, so it's staying as part of the same object. Just kind of speed things up, but certainly work on it, whatever's the easiest method for you. So now we have a different interior piece, which is nice. And if we apply scale and rotation to those, to that, to that, to that, and to that, there you go. Let's go ahead and place the pivot point of this one here at the bottom. Apply rotation scale, there we go. This one should have the pivot point still over there. We can place the 3D cursor back over there, press Shift S, cursor to selected. There we go. And that should be quite useful. Oh, actually, we need this to rotate to fit into this. And so this can be actually kind of hard to set up. And there's a couple different ways you could probably do it. What I found to be quite useful is just placing the 3D cursor to this edge. And with machine tools, it adopts the rotational value. So if we go and press N, bring up the view panel here, the 3D cursor, I'm going to right click, pin it, and go back to item. You'll see the 3D cursor is pinned to item now. I put it at the bottom so I can always use it if I need to right here. There's actually a rotational value that we want here, which is negative 5.62. Sometimes it can be hard to find this rotational value, but what you're looking for is to make sure that the cursor lines up with the face where you want your plug to be rotated to. And so in this case on the Z-axis, all right. With that 3D cursor there in the middle, you can press Shift A and create mesh, or excuse me, press Shift A, create empty plane axis, all right. And when you create this plane axis, it comes in zeroed out on rotation, but you can paste that value in there. So anytime you want a value, just hover over it, hit Control C. We'll go to the value for the empty, Control V, and we can rotate it just like so. All right. And as long as you do this all correctly, we can place the 3D cursor back over there now. Cursor to selected, it goes back over there. Now if we were to take any plug, more or less, we could actually grab this one, press Alt-D, create an instance of it, and we can select the empty. Now we can use machine tools, press Alt-A, and we should be able to align it. Usually all the values works just fine, but sometimes you want to uncheck X and Y and just leave Z, and that will rotate on the Z-axis, but it'll also align X, Y, and Z. And so this origin point's dead center at the bottom. This origin point's dead center at the bottom. As long as that's the case, this will work out just fine right here. You won't have any problem with that. Now, of course, there's always different places you can put your origin points or your pivot points. So just be a little bit careful with that, because sometimes you can run into a little bit of issues if you don't think about how you're lining things up, right? So now you can see we have this unit set up. It's got the boards in it. We got the empty window as well. And so we can create other variations, as many as we need, to kind of fill this area and propagate it so that it looks a little bit more interesting. All right. Nonetheless, we have all this kind of set up and in place. And so the easiest way to do this is just to simply select, let's take the empty first of all, and turn it to the outside wall here. We're going to press Control P. Cancel. I don't know why I did that. Let's try that again. Control P. Set parent to object keep transform. Okay. And so if we move the wall, it moves the empty along with it, which is nice. This is nice to leave here just because you might want to utilize it later on, because our kind of lose our pivot point way over there. So it's hard to snap anything to this face sometimes. And so we can do things like this now. Also, it's a good idea to start splitting these up as well. So when it's UV mapped and everything's ready to go, you can actually come in here and start culling off anything that's not really required. I'm going to press H and hide all this real quick, just so I can get into here. Delete that. Not going to be required. Okay, and I want to delete that in there. Alt H real quick. And so I can press L, P, separate selection. This is just to break it back down into a more granular level. Isn't necessarily required, but you can see here this works out quite well, and you would want to be very careful with your naming convention for everything like this as well. But at this point, This empty should be parented to one of these still, I think, and it's parented to the inside. So we're going to change that again. I like it on the outside personally. And but you might want to do an empty for both of them. In reality, you might. So we can go ahead and select all this now. And we can hit Alt-D, R-Z. And it doesn't matter where we place it. Here's the magic number. If you had 45 degrees and you divide it in half, it becomes 22.5. That's a really good number to remember, 22.5. And if you divide 22.5 in half, you get 11.25. So in this case, we're going to use negative 11.25. And it just so happens that it does not work. Of course, in this case, it's not going to work, right? So let's try this again. I think I messed up something real quick. And we're going to use it on the wall. So the wall is the active element. We need to use the 3D cursor to rotate. Yeah, so I messed up. It was supposed to be 3D cursor pivot point. So Alt-D, R-Z, rotate it out, negative 11.25. It has to spin from that origin point. And anything lower than 11.25, if you were to divide 11.25 in half, you can use sometimes, but there's a little problem with it, is it becomes a little bit inaccurate because for whatever reason it happens. All right. So after hitting Alt-D, rotating it on Z, negative 11.25 in this case, we can press Shift-R and rotate all this out. And you can see we have a whole corner unit, and all of these are instances of each other. And so at any time we want to say, like, maybe we want these inside areas, these inside plugs, replaced with this inside plug. We make this the active element. We can hit Control-L, link object data, and boom, just like that. They remain instances. So anytime you modify this mesh, it modifies any of the other ones, right? And so you can create variations rather quickly and kind of scatter them and replace them in places like this. Now, we still have the straight wall unit here, which is okay, but let's go ahead and hide that corner. We're not going to be using that one. And so we can, of course, move this one out using active element. So pivot point, active element, and I can do an Alt-D, Y, hold Control, and do that number. So we can make a straight run as well. We don't have to just keep with corners here. We could make the corners go all the way around in a circle again if we wanted, but we can definitely do it like this. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a empty plane axis. I'm going to snap it over here. All right, and because I've done that, I want it to be lined up at the bottom. All right, machine tools, when you mirror, you can mirror across objects. So if I make this the active element, I can mirror this across X with all of it. So I can press Alt Shift and X, and it will mirror like so. Alt Shift and Y now, and it will mirror like so. So this is how you lay out floors of a building rather fast. Now you probably don't want to actually mirror them usually. You want to create everything and spin it, generally speaking. But we're not set up right now to create a whole structure. I just want to kind of demo what we can do with these kinds of assets, because it becomes extremely fast to work with. And you can see you can make whole skyscrapers with interiors cut out and staircases inside of them and all kinds of fun stuff like that, right? And so this is going to take you to kind of that next level of working with buildings and stuff like that, is if you really need all of this with interior, you do it like this. If you don't need the interior, of course, you can just simply fill in the windows or put like some parallax occlusion on the windows like the Matrix demo did and things like that. So, and then you could also swap out certain parts of this architecture if you weren't mirroring it as well. So you'd actually like lay out little segments of the wall, and then you could swap out the architecture and everything. So different kinds of little features and greebles and pipes and other stuff like that. This includes things like, if you, for example, we'll do this on a corner unit here, but like right here, let's say I took these, I want to use Machine Tool Smart Face, which separates the face. It duplicates it and separates it. So you can press Shift D and then P, separate, right? That kind of deal. And then let's say I was just working a little area like this, and you can see if I extrude out like that, that's not going to work. I actually have to use the 3D cursor again. Press E, S, and I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and I have to taper it, right? But this side, interestingly, E, S, Shift Z, Well, let's try this. S, Shift Z, Control and Shift. There we go. This side, interestingly enough, we can move down on the grid, and it works. Okay, so this can turn into 2 units here. And so we can simply bevel this, increase the segment count. We could use a custom fall off. And it helps to do this before you spin out your wall, but you start to get the idea of where this goes. It's pretty universal and it's pretty efficient. Maybe I'll just do a super ellipse here, right? And so we could split this out, separate the selections here. This would maintain the same pivot point as the curve, right? And this one, oh, we need to make sure we get all the extra gone here though. There's probably some faces over here we don't need. Go ahead and delete that. This one, we'll finish cleaning it up real quick. Not too bad. Okay. And this one, we can place the origin point. Right here at the top, apply rotation scale. So it's 10 centimeters out, but this works for trim because it's kind of like a secondary detail, not a big deal. This one, on the other hand, the origin point has to stay over there because if we do instances and rotate it, you guessed it, negative 11.25. We have to do the same thing. All right, so when we laid out those walls originally, we would want this kind of detail added before we start laying out a whole building, obviously. Because at any point now, we can come in here and start making modifications, right? So for these guys here, maybe we want, we could dissolve these edges, maybe put 3 cuts in here, or 2 cuts in here. And we'll do an inset. I'm going to do Shift R and Shift R, so we have the same thing going on here. So we might be able to get away with doing something like this as well. Right, you can see we can add just a little bit of a repeating pattern to it. That might be something we want. On the flip side, I made a video before on using the warp tool. The warp tool does create converging tapered angles on flat faces or cubes or whatever the case may be. I'm just going to demo it real quick with just a cube instead of doing a whole wall, but very simple. You use the 3D cursor, so you can shift, right click, you got the 3D cursor. If we're snapping to the grid, I hit control, we can snap to the grid. And so we can take this in edit mode and we can have that be our converging point. So we'll use mesh, transform, we're going to use warp. Okay, you can see sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it is absolutely not got it right, and that's unfortunate. But let's see if it's just the angle here. It might be just the angle, so we'll try like a 90-degree. Yep, the angle might have messed it up. And you can see how this can be kind of a runaway train here. But it just so happens you can play around with the numbers here. You'll find a lot of times that 11.25 still works just fine. And then you could place the origin point to the cursor. So if you rotate this out, this should, oh, our object's inverted. Let's recalculate that. This should move every 11.25 here. Okay, so this is another way you can do things to kind of achieve those kind of results. It's pretty cool how it works. I just wanted to point it out real quick because it's not too bad. And it's okay. But also a cube, we're just going to practice on the cube. We're not going to lay out another whole section. But if you loop cut a cube across the middle, you bevel an edge, and you press C to clamp it, you can adjust and get the same kind of amount of faces on just one corner. So if you need a lot of faces, this might be more efficient than using a cylinder. But you'll have to figure out how long your wall needs to be and how many units you'll need to make that happen, because you'll probably end up deleting like a certain amount of them and do something like this, right? So you get a little bit more curvature to it, something like that maybe. And so that usually works out quite well. Also, even though we're using 11.25 in these examples here, you may use 22.5, but you may also be using increments of 10. Occasionally that happens, where you'll want to spin things like 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, things like that. So in this case, I think this is going to be, I don't know what this is going to be yet, but we'll find out. And let's see, this is a -30. And if I hit Shift R, you'll see that we can create 3 units for this area, something like so. All right. And as a result of that, we can now work with this in the same kind of a manner. If I press Control J, join it all together, and I'm just going to inset every one of these individually. Let's, comes a little weird here on the end. Let's merge everything on the end one. Let's see if we can do this appropriately now. Let's see. So if I inset all of these, because they're separated. Yeah, it doesn't really like that, huh? Merge by distance. I'm pressing L to select it like that, but merge by distance on all of them. Let's try that one more time. Yeah, that's what I was expecting to happen right there, so that's good. And just like before, E, S, Shift, S, we can see we can converge in like so. So this is also pretty useful if you want to create corner units where the whole window tapers inwards, right? And you can make your plugs for the outside here and the inside, etc. But you can have different kind of setups here. And so your plugs would end up becoming rounded. Sometimes you'll have to round them out, sometimes you won't. It's just going to depend on the type of architecture. When you're looking at your images there, you can start to break it down. Sometimes they're just flat faces like this for the most part. Other times it might end up actually being rounded and a little bit more high poly. So anyways, all in all, this is just kind of the introduction to get us started into more complex projects. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be checking you out in the next one. All right, so take care, guys. See you then.